little progressive episode on the transformational zones of pitching mechanics, specifically transformational zone 1A, B, and C, taking a look at the thoracic spine and scapulothoracic joint. We'll look at the shoulder a little bit with regards to that as well, but we're taking the time to go through these episodes because the previous ones just kind of hashed through everything, kind of generally speaking. Took a look at what I assess, what I treat with, and what I use to implement in terms of performance enhancement from there as well. So we'll transition TZ1A to B to C and what that looks like, and we need to again look at these transformational zones because transformational zones are where injury occurs. So that's why we assess there, that's why we /evaluate there, but that's why we also treat there, because if we're not properly loading first, gathering the proprioceptive feedback we need to, we're not going to unwind the way that we should and further load throughout the kinetic chain the way that we should to fend off injury, chronic fatigue, pain, and wear and tear. So thoracic spine is a huge game player in terms of the loadability, first of all, of itself, scapulothoracic joint, and what happens at the shoulder, but then also the hip, and then the foot and the ankle, and then vice versa with that as well. Cervical spine also plays a big role in this. So specifically what we're looking at in TZ1A, B, and C, we've talked a lot about this top-down driver and what the upper extremities play in this pivotal role in terms of further loading the trunk. So in TZ1A right here, we're coming on up in the slide step, we're kind of set position right here, and then we're transitioning to TZ1B. As we do that, as a right-handed pitcher, my glove side arm is acting as this top-down driver. It's driving and facilitating as well as the hips, kind of this pivot, this teeter-totter, this rocking chair-like effect through the hips and from the bottom up and then from the top down, what the thoracic spine is going to do to load the runway of the scapula. So as we go into TZ1B right here, nomenclature-wise, we have this osteopathic way of referring to this in regards to a type 2, type 1, out of sync, in sync. And so with regards to what's happening at TZ1B, relative motion-wise in the thoracic spine, we talked about that we have relative internal rotation taking place at the right hip in TZ1B because the femur, the tibia are rotating faster than what the pelvis is towards home plate. So relative internal rotation. What's going to enable us to load that internal rotation, not only that posterior hip capsule and that posterior lateral pelvic girdle complex, but the thoracic spine, the upper extremities ability to load from the top down kind of preset. So glove side arm wise, we're rotating kind of towards the rubber as my head is fixating on my target at home plate, which gives me relative left rotation and left side bend of my cervical spine, which will affect thoracic spine and scapulothoracic loadability. Thoracic spine wise, we get this type 2 in sync, meaning rotation and side bend to the right, because the pelvis and T-spine are rotating in the same direction. Before in TZ1C, we get something else. So we constantly have this teeter-totter and this motion. We'll a lot of times talk about position and motion. In order for us to be able to move, we need to get these opposite loads of motion so that we can explode. And so ultimately you'll see kind of what I'm talking about here, in that when we get into this position here, we get ready to launch to TZ1C out of TZ1B, the abduction, the internal rotation, the extension of this back hip right here, pivotal and important, which will be helped about by this thoracic spine load right here. So you see that I get this frontal plane load, and I get this frontal plane load of the hip, and this right side bend is an over-exaggerating of the thoracic spine. Glove side arm-wise is going to give us, so we have that rotation and that side bend right here. As I get set into TZ1 kind of B, that helps load the scapulothoracic joint. So if we don't have motion in the hip, we don't have motion in the thoracic spine, scapula is going to compensate, therefore the shoulder and the elbow will get chewed on up. So this side bend right and this right rotation in sync in the thoracic spine enable us then to, as we transition from TZ1A to TZ1B right here of the pitching mechanics, we get this anterior tilt and this inferior glide of the scapula here, so that and this extension of kind of the shoulder, which is brought about by that kind of that superior glide and kind of that anterior tilt right here. As we go into TZ1B, that enables us to then kind of posteriorly tilt the shoulder girdle, the scapula. So we're going to get some posterior kind of tilt and rotation. So we have this right here. So we have a little tilt forward, glide inferior. Now we have this posterior rotation, this inferior glide with this upward rotation, as this right rotation of the thoracic spine and side bend enable us to glide the scapula, retract it to the midline of the body, both with the left arm driving the right arm, affecting scapula, but then thoracic joint as well. As we transition then, so shoulder-wise, really pivotal that all of that stuff syncs on up, because we need the joint capsule, the glenohumeral joint capsule, as well as the four rotator cuff muscles and the long head of the biceps, which this stuff meshes together to be able to, like a seed in the garden, be well seated. We need the head of the humerus to be well seated into the glenoid fossa. We've talked a lot in our episode about about labral tears, episode 1, in regards to the depth of the glenoid. So basically this basketball sitting on this golf ball tee, the depth, and then also the diameter of this, and how the head of the humerus is 4 times the size of the glenoid, and that the depth based on the labrum providing this fibrocartilage rim on the outside and around the edge of the glenoid right there will deepen this this surface by twice its normal and typical depth. So we need this good approximation, almost again like that screwdriver effect, that multi-joint approximation. Oddly enough, it keeps getting back to this closed kinetic chain like phenomenon of multi-joint compression, congruency, co-contractions, and approximation of proximal stability for distal mobility, so that we can get this proximal acceleration, this distal load in the opposite direction as we unwind, so that things can just snap like a rubber band through. What we'll oftentimes see in these positions, again, when we looked at the episode of the hip previous to this in TZ1B to C, we'll a lot of times see early external rotation with no good or not as good of extension and abduction. We'll also at the glenohumeral joint see early rotation towards home plate rather than getting that good external rotation of the shoulder, that great retraction and medial glide of the scapula with that good posterior tilt, due to the good extension of the thoracic spine and the extension of the right hip. So if that's not taking place, the scapula's hanging out and hanging the shoulder and the elbow basically to dry, so that when we get to TZ1C, now thoracic spine-wise, we still have this type 2, this rotation and side bend in the same or in the opposite direction, because now we have the pelvis that is unleashing towards home plate in TZ1C, with a scapula though, although it's rotating towards home plate, it's not rotating as fast, which gives us right rotation and right side bend before we prop up and propel out of that. So TZ1B to C, pivotal transformational zone, in that we have in sync type 2 motion at the thoracic spine, transitioning to type 2 out of sync right here. So type 2 out of sync, and again a reference to shoulder girdle in relation to the pelvic girdle here. And so as this occurs, there's still this huge amount of loadability that's taking place throughout the region we'll call the knees to the shoulders, around the entire portion of the body. We typically refer to that as the core. I don't typically like to do that anymore, just because you look up core in Webster, it says the genesis of movement, it's the feet and the ankles, so that should actually be the core. So TZ1C, what I'm looking here for in terms of my assessment is that from B to C that I get this early external rotation of the right hip, and then I get this early motion from the top down, the upper extremity and the shoulder and the arm doing too much to make up for what's not taking place mobility, stability, and functional strength-wise below it. When you're assessing your athletes, take a look at those